So today we have to go through feature of Java 8, which is default method in interface. Let's see. Default method in interface. Defined concrete method in the interface with default keyword are called as default methods. So when we are going to write concrete method, whole method, a method with body, with implementation in interface, then we are with the default keyword, a concrete method with body in interface with a default keyword. Then we are going to call that method as a default method. So I am assuming that you know Java. That's why you are learning Java 8. So when you know Java, you know that you cannot write a method with body in the interface. What you can write only in interface is abstract methods and final static variables. So when you are going to implement the interface, you have to provide the implementation or write the body of those methods inside your class. Or if you don't do so, then you have to make that class as abstract class. You cannot write a body of method, implementation of method in the interface as till you know in Java. But with the Java 8 features, means after the JDK 1.8 or within the JDK 1.8 or from the JDK 1.8, in the interface, you can write method with implementation in interface. But in order to do so, you have to use default keyword with that method. So what's next? Also known as default method that we are going to write in interface with default keyword is also known as default method, defender method. So default method, when we are writing a concrete method in interface with default keyword, we can call that as defender method, or we can call that as virtual extension method. Default method are public by default. Another thing you remember is when you want to make any class properties, maybe constructor, method, or variables public, then you can write the public keyword before those properties, those member of the class, like variable, method, or constructor. You can write public before those members. If you want to make it protected, you can write protected before variables, before constructor, or let's say before method. If you want to make that private, you can write private variables, private method, private constructor. So no one except that class can access those member of the class. But in the case of default, you don't write default. If you want to make any variable default, then you don't write default keyword. You just left it and don't even write any access modifiers before those variables, before those methods to make it default. You just don't write any access modifier if you want to make those default. But here, when you are writing a method in interface with body, you have to write the default keyword explicitly. So you write the method with body and you write before that method a default keyword. Then you don't have to mention the access modifier. That is by default going to be public. The concrete method with default keyword is by default going to be public. You don't have to write the access modifier. So default methods are public by default. Default methods will be inherited to subclasses. Means when you are going to inherit that interface, then the default method is going to be inherited in the subclasses. Subclasses can override the interface default method, and you can even override those default methods coming from the interface in the subclass, we cannot write default method inside class. What? We cannot write default method inside class. As you know, in Java, you cannot write default keyword with method, or even you cannot write default keyword with, let's say, variable. You just left that, and by default it is going to be default. So exactly in here, you cannot write default method, default keyword with method inside class. You can only use default keyword with method in the interface. And when you are overriding the upcoming default method from the interface in subclasses, even at that point, you don't have to mention default keyword. Even when we are overriding the default method in subclasses, we cannot write default keyword with method inside classes. So you can inherit this default method in subclasses, but at that point, when you are overriding in subclass that method, you don't have to mention the default keyword. You just have to take care of the name of the method. Name of the method have to be same. Parameter of the method have to be same. Number of parameter, sequence of parameter, return type of method, return type of those parameters. Those have to be same, but you don't have to write the default keyword in the class when you are overriding the default method coming from the sub interface or subclass. Not subclass, sub interface, master interface. So even when we are overriding the default method in our subclasses, we cannot write default keyword with that method inside a class. We cannot use default keyword before method anywhere except interface. As I said, we cannot override object class method as default method inside interface. As you know, for every class, the object class is by default getting extended. So object class is subclass for every classes. Not subclass, superclass for every classes we can write in Java. And when the object class is superclass for every class, we can override the method coming from the superclass, which is object class, in our subclasses. But we cannot override object class method in our interface by using default keyword before those method. So we cannot override object class method as default method inside interface. As we can write the concrete method in interface by using default keyword, it doesn't mean we started overriding the object class methods by using default keyword before the method inside the interface. So we cannot override object class method as default method inside interface. If we are writing default method in interface, must have to provide body. If we are writing default method in interface, must have to provide body. If there is a method inside interface and we are writing default keyword before that method, then it is compulsory that we are going to have to provide the body for that method with which we are using the default keyword. So these are the few things in default method in interface. Question arises, why default methods is needed? What are the purpose of default method? So before the defender method or default method, before JDK 1.8 or Java 8, when we cannot do this, we cannot write concrete method with body in interface, what we have to do, what we are doing. So suppose before JDK 1.8, we have interface with single abstract method, or say we have abstract method in interface before JDK1 pointed, we can write abstract method in interface, but we cannot write body of those methods. So what we are doing at that time before Java 8, we are extending interface and then providing implementation, providing body for those methods. So there is an interface with abstract methods. We are implementing those interface in a class and then providing body for those method of interface that is inherited in the class. And then from that class, we are calling that class as util class. So here is the interface. You say, let me show you a diagram. Let's say this is an interface. Consider this as an interface. We have method, abstract method. We implemented this interface in a class. This is a class. Interface. Interface is having abstract method. We implemented this interface in this class and we provided the body for the method which is inside this interface that is coming in this class. So we are calling this as util class, and then we got another classes, multiple classes. We are extending this class in these classes and we are using the method with body that we provided inside this class. So this class become util class, and the whole purpose of this class is to provide the implementation, provide the body for the methods that is coming from this interface. Because before Java 8, we cannot write body of method inside interfaces. So we need this util class, and then other classes we extend this class and use those method that we have written the body for those method inside this class. But when we got these features of writing body of method inside the interface, what we can do, we can define new functionality in the interface without breaking down the implementation. We can define or we can write new functionality in the interface. Means we can write a method body. Basically in method we are going to write the statements that we are going to run, that is going to run when we are going to call that method. So we can call those body of the method as an functionality, because method is a functionality. In method we write code that is going to be responsible to perform certain task. Means functionality, we are defining functionality with the method. So we are defining new functionality in the interface without breaking down the implementation. In interface we can provide the functionality without breaking down in the implementation, without breaking down into the util classes. We can provide the functionality inside the interface. We can write, or you can say we can write method body. In method body there is going to be functionality, so we can write functionality in the interface without breaking down the interface into the classes to provide the functionality. So I think you got the idea. We can easily provide functionality in implementing classes. Now when we are going to, now we don't need this class, util class. We don't need this class. We can get rid of this class. So what it is saying, we can easily provide functionality in implementing classes. When we are going to implement this interface in this class, those method which have body, means which is having functionality, is going to be available in this class. when we are going to implement this interface, those functionality, those method with body is going to be available in this class. We don't need the mediator class, util class. So exactly this is saying we can define new functionality in the interface without breaking down into implementation. In the interface, we can provide functionality without breaking down it into the pieces, into the util classes. And when we are going to implement this class, this interface into the classes, those functionality will be come in these classes. We don't need this mediator class. We can easily provide functionality in the implementing classes. We can avoid writing separate utility class. Same thing, we can avoid writing separate utility class. That's why default method in interface cannot use default method. Default with method with static. You cannot write a static keyword with the method. If you are writing a method in interface with default keyword, a method, when we are writing concrete method in interface with default keyword, then with that method you cannot write static keyword. In interface cannot use default with method with abstract. In interface cannot use default with abstract method. Basically, if you are not writing body of the method, if you are only writing the signature of the method, then you cannot write the default keyword with that method. This is the same point that we have gone through. If you are writing the default keyword with the method in interface, then you have to provide the body. You cannot leave that method as abstract. So here you cannot write static with default keyword in the method, so it's wrong. You cannot write abstract method with default keyword, that's also wrong. And when you are using default with any method, you cannot only write the signature, you have to provide the body. Protected default method. So by default method is public, as we have gone through. So you cannot write protected. You cannot make a method, default method, as protected. So it's time to do some codes for default method in interface. Let's see. We will do our code on Eclipse, and the coding part, the practice part of default method, we are going to do this in our next session, next video. So stay tuned.